Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time to do a little bit of myth busting. And I had a subscriber ask me, hey, if you avoid combining carbohydrates and fat in the same meal, will you lose body fat? Will it be harder for you to gain body fat? Is this a good method? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this a little further. Because the thing is, this is something that is a very popular myth that has gone around like in the bodybuilding world, not necessarily the athletic world or sports nutrition or anything like that, but the bodybuilding world. You've seen this stuff written in magazines for, 15, 20 years now. Even bodybuilding coaches and people telling people not to combine carbs and fat in the same meal. Let's not only discuss the practical limitations of this, of how that would really narrow your food selection, but let's discuss the problem with the idea itself. All right, the idea itself is coming from the fact that, carbohydrates will somehow spike insulin levels, right? That they're going to make your insulin levels go up, and that when insulin levels go up, any fat that you eat gets stored. The insulin is a fat storage hormone for actual fat in your diet. All right, first of all, that's not true. That absolutely is not true. Insulin being elevated causes your muscles, liver, organs, everything else to have the glucose in your bloodstream, the glucose from the carbs you eat, from the surplus protein that you eat. And that's what people need to keep in mind. The surplus protein that you eat turns into glucose. That's one of the reasons people on ketogenic diets don't eat really high protein. All right, medical ketogenic diets are 80% fat. They're actually not high protein diets, so that they do, because protein causes higher circulating insulin levels also, something people need to realize. So all these people who are like trying to avoid insulin response in their diet who eat a high protein diet, it's absurd. It's absurd. You're causing circulating insulin from that also. It's not really much different. But the idea there is that that's going to store fat. Well, it doesn't. Circulating insulin causes you to burn more carbohydrates for fuel at the time. And if you're burning carbs for fuel and there's a bunch of lipids and triglycerides floating around in your bloodstream from either eating fructose, from eating dietary fat, things like that, then yeah, they're going to be stored because you're burning something else. It's the excess fat that gets stored. The excess triglycerides, and they can come from not only dietary fat, they can come from fructose, but most people don't eat enough fructose for that to be an issue, other than a lot of obese people who sit around eating tons of processed sugar and shit. But the thing is that it's just causing you to burn the other for fuel. Well, the thing is, that's true whether you have a large insulin response or not. It's the excess fat being consumed, but people need to realize people who train and exercise and who are healthy and don't have metabolic syndrome don't actually see big jumps in insulin levels from eating carbohydrates. All right, that's the big problem with this idea already. You don't see that when you're hard training, you're in shape, you lift weights 2 or 3 times a week with at least moderate intensity, you do cardio. If you've been doing this for a while, which most people who would be following a regimen like this have been doing exercise and things for a while, they probably are not insulin resistant people. They don't see big surges in insulin from eating carbohydrates in a meal. It's going to rise, but it's not going to be some big spike like people are thinking of. All right, it's not going to be a big spike like people are thinking of. And number 2, you don't ever store fat when there isn't an excess, at least not in the long term. But people need to realize you are storing fat and releasing fat all the time, meaning your body is actually gaining fat when you're in a caloric deficit also. It's just losing it faster than it's storing it. Fat tissue is a dynamic organism, and until people get over that fact that muscle tissue, fat tissue, all this stuff are dynamic organisms that are growing and shrinking all the time. And in fact, you might have 3 hours every day to where you're gaining fat when you're actually losing weight and losing body fat overall every day or every week. All right, you need to keep that in mind. Your different food intakes will cause you to gain a little bit of body fat through the day, but you have other periods of time to where you're losing more body fat than you're gaining, so therefore it's going down. So people have to quit thinking in the simplistic terms of either just gain or loss. It's net gain or loss, or dynamic. It's moving all the time. These are living tissue that have energy going in and out every second of every day until you die. So from the moment you're conceived to the moment you die, that's what happens. You're a dynamic organism. But it's still the excess that is causing the problem. All right, it's the excess fat. Well, if you're not eating excess calories Nothing's getting stored really as fat in a net way anyways. Yeah, you might gain some fat for an hour, but then for the next 3 or 4 hours you're losing fat and you lose more than you gain. And vice versa, even when you're overfeeding, I mean, you're still going to have periods of time where you're losing fat. But the thing is, it doesn't cause more fat gain to combine fat and carbs together because of the insulin. It's still the surplus that causes you to gain fat. And it's not about timing. It doesn't matter if you can avoid gaining fat during certain times of the day when your total 24-hour turnover is a positive energy gain and more dietary fat than you burn. Or, additional de novo lipogenesis if you drop your fat really low and overfed for a long time, the carbs will start storing also. But it's about the surplus over the 24-hour period, or even the 7-day period, or the 30-day period. I mean, let's be honest here. You can actually gain or lose fat on certain days of the week and still your net for the week be the other direction. We're dynamic organisms. It's all about the net turnover. So just because you think you're avoiding it for a little while through the day by certain combinations doesn't mean anything. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Furthermore, they're working off the assumption that when you eat food that you digest all of it within the next hour or two and it's in the bloodstream and it's done. That's not true either. It's not true either at all. In fact, it can take dietary fat that you consume sometimes 2 or 3 days to get all of it through your system. So you see the problem we're getting to here? How are you going to separate your fat from your carbs into different meals and not do anything? If it takes you 8 hours to even extract most of the fat from a meal with a bunch of fat in it, and it could take up to 72 hours to get every last drop of it, if you're eating a fatty meal, you have fat circulating into your bloodstream through your GI tract for a very, very long period of time. In fact, you might eat 6 or 7 or 10 carb meals before you're completely done absorbing all that fat. So if the concern is the circulating insulin with that, well, it's going to happen repeatedly after that meal. It doesn't matter that you didn't eat them together. In fact, the carbs that you ate with the fatty meal, you probably will have absorbed most of them into the bloodstream and have utilized them and stored them as glucose and blood sugar through your system and everything else before you've really gotten well into digesting and absorbing the body fat. It's going to go first. Of course, furthermore, they're eating protein with the fat. Well, if they're worried about any sort of insulin circulating, they better cut the protein out too and eat only a fat meal, because the protein is going to cause circulating insulin. Again, a point people always overlook, and they don't understand the timing of it is not how people think, oh, you eat a meal and everything's done in a couple hours. No, it doesn't work that way. Not in the human body. Maybe some sort of machine you built in the lab can do that, but humans don't do that. Unless it's all extremely refined stuff. Okay, if you're drinking nothing but glucose powder and whey protein and freeform aminos, fine, but most of us are eating food. It can take a long time to get all of it through the system. So this separating it up at this timing becomes absurd. Furthermore, how are you even going to pull this off? Like, people need to realize, how are you going to restrict yourself to all carbs and protein or all fat and protein? Okay, you can cut carbs out, because if people are eating cooked meat, raw meat, by the way, has a lot of glucose in it, so it has carbs in it. Just an FYI. Cooking it, though, breaks that down. But if you were just eating raw, freshly killed meat, yeah, you're actually going to get carbs from it, so that doesn't work. But cooked meat, okay, that's your option. You're eating cooked meat. That's how you're going to get your fat and protein meals. How are you going to cut all the fat out on your carb meals? Most carbs have some fat in them. And people will say, well, it's not a lot. Well, it's not a lot, but if you're talking about separating them out, how low are you going to get it? I mean, realistically speaking, getting a meal that has carbs and protein both in it in significant amounts, that doesn't have at least 5 or 10% of its calories from fat, if not more, is going to be very difficult to do unless you're restricting your stuff down to the very leanest meats you can consume, fat-free Greek yogurt, fat-free dairy of different types. Finding the lowest fat grains you can possibly find, maybe white rice, because brown rice has fat in it. Now, it's considered a good fat. The brown rice oil actually has some health benefits. But, so what are you going to eat? White rice, white potatoes, and fat-free dairy? I mean, how are you going to even get the fat completely out of your carb meals? I mean, it depends on how much are you talking about removing it. Are you talking about just eating low fat on those meals? Or are you talking about eating no fat, getting under, 1 gram a serving? it's going to be very, very hard to do. What would even be your threshold for that? I mean, this is not practical. It's not practical at all. So let's remember here, when you're talking about doing something like this, number one, biologically it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work the way these people think, because they have way too simplistic of a model of fat storage when they're discussing this. It's not how the human body works. They have way too simplistic of a model of the human digestive process and timing of it. Again, it doesn't work. And number three, from a practical perspective, cutting down to foods that are going to have either no carbs, almost no carbs, or almost no fat, and your different meals is going to severely limit your whole food selection. You're going to have to go with more refined foods for the most part in order to even pull this off. But a lot of whole foods always have a certain amount of mixture there. They can be low fat, but they're still going to be fat in them. And again, conversely, the whole idea of fat and protein together, if you're going to eat a high protein diet, this whole idea gets thrown out the window anyways, because the protein elevates insulin. Again, the whole idea is really absurd, and it's just the sort of shit used to sell magazines, and it's called pseudoscience, to where some coach or someone pretends that he's using science in the human body to get methods using just some kooky ass method that doesn't even work, that people still just gain or lose fat based upon their caloric intake. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.